pianists, teachers, colleagues, and friends. Today we're talking about how to teach The Wild Horseman or The Wild Rider by Robert Schumann. This is, of course, from his Op.68, No. 8. It sounds like this. If we haven't met before, my name is Jana Williamson, and welcome to my home piano studio in the suburbs of Chicago. This is a very well-known piece by a very well-known composer. I do think it's the first Schumann that I have featured on the YouTube channel, so you can interpret that how you wish. This piece is one of those that's easy to learn because it's very catchy and patterned. It's the same thing essentially 3 times. Just transposed and moved to the left hand in the middle, but it's technically quite difficult to play. There are a lot of favorite student pieces that are similar to this in style, in that they are in a minor key and fast and, fingery and exciting. One of the ones that comes to mind is the Mozart Rondo alla Turca, which I also have a video on. And I feel like something like this is a great preparatory piece for a piece like that is several levels more difficult. And because this requires a lot of attention to technique, it gets a student in the frame of mind that, yes, I might be able to learn a piece and hear it and understand how it's supposed to go, but still have to work quite a bit at how my fingers and hands and arms are going to work in order to have it sound artistic and be up to tempo and all those things. The main feature with this piece is staccato technique. So I got a request from a viewer to talk about this piece, and I actually have sat on it for a long time because I've been thinking about how I want to talk about staccato technique. I think staccato technique is one of the hardest things to teach. I was confirmed in this because my friend Kate Boyd over at the Piano Prof YouTube channel just recently did a video all about staccato technique. I had no idea she was going to do this. And the way that she spent time talking about this confirmed that this is in fact something that's quite difficult for students and quite difficult for teachers to know how to get their verbiage around. So I am not going to say in this video that I have all the answers on how to teach staccato, but I do hope that there's something helpful, and this piece is a great etude for staccato technique. Before we get into that, just a brief discussion. As I said, this is in ABA form. The A section has the right hand melody in A minor, and then it flips for the B section to the left hand having the melody, and we've transposed to F major. So that's something I would cover right away with my students, and I would make sure that we were really clear before a student even went home on basic A minor chords. You get a lot of this 1-4-1, and then moving down to E on the bottom for a root position 5 chord, but also just knowing that that's a A minor tonic chord in between those, and then that the right hand is going to use the F major inverted chords and C major inverted chords to get tonic and dominant in F once we're in that middle section. So just a quick theory little bit there. And as is probably obvious to anyone who's ever looked at this piece or heard it or taught it or tried to play it, it is usually far more difficult for students' left hands to navigate that B section well than it is for the right hand, because our right hands just get naturally so much more practice at being nimble. And that's true even by the time we get to this early intermediate level. We've spent more time playing melodic content in our right hand and chords in our left hand. So to flip that is difficult. Very similar to the Bergmuller arabesque, which is a very similar level to this. The part where the left hand has the 16th notes. That part tends to take more time for students to be able to play in a technically proficient manner, just like the B section of this one as well. And I do have a video on the Bergmuller arabesque, so you can click right up there to find that one. I think we have 2 main ways that we can verbalize staccato technique with students at this early intermediate level. And I will confess I am borrowing some of this terminology from Catherine Rollin in her Pathways to Artistry series, which is a great series. She breaks down a lot of technical skills, particularly in the Technique Book 1. And she has two ways that she talks about staccato. The first is forearm staccato, and that would be that you achieve a bounce by hinging at the elbow. There's no wrist movement or finger movement involved, but it's all achieved by hinging here. So if I just play some basic chords that way, I'm bouncing off the keys, but all of the movement is coming from here. Rollin's second way of describing staccato is called push-off staccato, and the idea is that once you press a key, your wrist goes up first and you get this push-off idea. This would be similar to if you're just jumping on a trampoline or even just on a floor, that you push off with your knees bending. So if I try that push-off motion again with those same chords, I'm trying not to hinge from here, but instead you should be seeing the motion here. The principle that Kate Boyd very eloquently and succinctly states is that the faster you're going to play, the smaller your motion is going to be. And so if our students approach staccatos, particularly in something fast like The Wild Rider, with that forearm staccato entirely, it's going to make for inaccuracy and slower playing. That also doesn't allow for a two-note slur gesture. A two-note slur I teach is a down, up, so it's almost as if you have that push-off staccato at the end of the two notes. And so instead, I have tried to work with students on this with that idea of a wrist staccato or a push-off staccato. I'm trying to keep this joint very quiet and not moving, and be more economical with my range of motion so that I can ultimately play faster. Now, am I truly achieving all of that just with my wrist, or are my fingers part of it? I'm not sure I can even entirely tell you that. You can take a look at that video and see what you think is happening. But that type of motion close to the keys, over the keys, without being locked, and with that little bit of, pushing off, is what's going to allow for a faster tempo. And of course, the same is true with the left-hand melody. And so hopefully I achieved that. My left hand is not as good at doing this as my right hand is, so hopefully it still was working there. With the left hand chords in the A section, they're not all marked staccato. When you have the two-note slur in measure 2 and 3, the left hand just has a quarter note. So those can sink a little bit more and they'll get that more natural emphasis. And then that matches with the other part. Same thing in the left hand, eighth notes in measure 11. Right where I ended, measure 13, is a typical problem spot for students. There's just more coordination involved. Today I'm looking at this in Jennifer Lynn's Journey Through the Classics, book 3, and I really like her editing and the selections in this book. The one printing problem, which I'm not sure anyone foresaw when they were doing the page layout on this, is that measure 13 is the top of the second page. And so the last time I taught this, it happened to be in this book, and my student really struggled to fluidly move into that measure. I'm not sure how much of that was a technical issue and how much of that was that it was visually up, on the beginning of the second page, and she was never mentally ready for it or visually ready for it. This piece does also show up in Keith Snell's blue books, the level 2 books, and in that edition it's all on one page. So while I don't love Keith Snell's editing as much as some other options, it's worth looking at that edition of this simply because it is all formatted onto one page. So that measure will take extra practice. And I do like this fingering, thumb on F, and then come up and use 2 and 4 for the third. Left hand, 1 on A, and then 2 and 5 for the 5th. That gives you a little bit of nice symmetry of your finger 2s together on the chord. So that's a problem spot you're going to want to address with your student and do a little backwards work. Can they play just that measure, and then can they get into it? And then move right in tempo throughout. As far as general practice techniques go, backwards practice is what I would recommend to my students. So at the end of the A section, play the last measure and then back it up to the last 2 measures and then the last 3, etc. Same thing at the end of the B section. You could start both at that spot where I was just playing, or at the end, the true end of the B section, to really make sure you achieve smooth, steady momentum through the ends of the sections. You can also use a metronome to be an outside source on telling your student whether or not he or she is playing steadily. This is a classic example of a piece that students like to play the beginning, and then they get through a few measures and they kind of peter out and can't play the rest of the piece. So anything you can do in the lesson and in your practice assignments to your student to get them to break out of the habit of always starting at the beginning is just going to make for more efficient learning and ultimately steadier and better playing when they're ready to perform this piece. I hope that gives you a few ideas on working both on staccato technique as well as working specifically on the Wild Rider or the Wild Horseman by Schumann. If you have great thoughts on teaching staccato, would you leave a comment please below this video? And I wish you all the best in your teaching and playing.